you're running along and you think you're doing well. I was leading at about that point, about the 300 mark, and then it sort of buckled off the 8th hurdle, and I didn't recover from that well enough to then bring home the medal.
Is the hurdles the best sporting metaphor for all our lives? Every few metres, just as you are finding your rhythm and hitting your stride and feeling good, a new obstacle arises in your path. It forces you to check your stride, adjust your pace, figure out how to overcome it. And then just as you find your rhythm again, boom, another curveball. There's another obstacle to get past. And it just keeps on happening again and again until the finish line. Dr. Jana Pittman, Olympic hurdler, is my guest on Curveball. Hurdler Jana Pittman was training for the 2016 Rio Olympics, and there was a lot riding on it. Despite being a 2-times world champion and a Commonwealth Games medalist, she'd never won gold at the Olympics. Injury had plagued her at the 2004 Athens Games, and she'd missed out on the 2008 Beijing Olympics entirely. There was also a switch to bobsledding for the Winter Olympics in 2014. But there was unfinished business on the athletics track, and Jana was training incredibly hard to make the Olympic team that would go to Brazil. She was due at training at 5 p.m, but then her phone rang. Jana Pittman, who was on the other end of the phone line?
That's a funny question. No, I got a call from a friend who works in obstetric medicine, the same as where I want to be, asking if I'd like to scrub in for a caesarean section, which basically means delivering a baby, obviously, by the sunroof. And the opportunity was, I guess, a little bit too good to pass up.
So to give people some context here, though, the first Olympics you competed in was 2000 Sydney. As a 17-year-old. Right. But this was 2016. So this is 16 years later. You'd had a child, you're in your mid-30s, and in a race like the 400-metre hurdles, which is considered pretty brutal on the body as far as athletics goes, why were you even contemplating a comeback?
Because we'd just done the Sochi Olympics in 2014, and I was actually in probably one of the best shapes I'd ever been in. So I was uninjured, which was the feature of all my other Olympic campaigns. So, I was racing really well even in the Beijing year, 2008, and did my Achilles about 2 months before the Olympic Games. So I'd been selected for the team but was too injured to run. So that was Athens 2004, London 2008 and 2012 Olympics, 3 Olympics in a row where I was selected for the team but unfortunately didn't make it to the start line, or made it, like in Athens, and didn't bring a medal home. So I think when you all of a sudden find yourself injury-free in the best shape of your life, coming off the back of the Winter Olympics, it was only 2 years till Rio, and I thought, well, why not give it a crack and see if I can't bag that medal I've been so desperate for.
But you got that call, you're deep into your medical degree. You must have known this day was coming where you had to make a choice.
I think I'm incredibly lucky because so many athletes don't find that day. It finds it for you. So where your injuries prevail and you think, well, okay, that's it, I can't do any more, or, you can't fund yourself, because obviously funding's a big deal for a lot of athletes to actually be able to participate in sport. So it was a really natural transition that my heart fell into medicine rather than training. And the day you're not committed in that space, the day you should retire. And I feel so grateful that I found medicine. I already knew I was a 3rd, 4th year medical student at that stage. But to realise I was more in love with my new career than I was with my previous was a real gift.
Tell me about your late night reflection that night, though. You make this, sliding doors sort of decision. What was it like to be there for the delivery of the baby and to know this is my new path now, I'm letting go of athletics?
It was extraordinary, and it is legitimately, as you just said, it was. So it was an instant, I'm retiring. So it wasn't even I'm going home to think about this scenario. It was, I knew when I made the decision to walk into that surgical room, into the theatres, rather than go to training. And to make it worse, my coach was already at the track, so waiting for me. So to know that I had to send a message to him to say, look, I know I love athletics, and don't get me wrong, it would have been amazing to be an Olympic gold medalist. It was something I'd dreamed of all my sports career. But to realise that my entire future, the next 30, 40, 50 years of my life was going to go into helping women have children or to, looking after women with cancer and things like that was such a blessing that he understood, and I think he thought it was coming. And so I went home at about 7:00, collected all my family, including my mum and dad, and we went out for pizza and we celebrated. So it was a real instant transition.
That athlete identity, though, it's so hard won. It's decades of grit and determination and training at all hours. It was probably the way you had defined yourself up until that point. Were you afraid to leave that athlete Jana Pittman behind, or was there a little bit of a relief in the decision?
Even today, though, I still miss the sports career. So I don't think you can actually ever let that go. It's a huge part of my identity and who I am. And, I do a lot of speaking gigs and podcasts and things these days. So we're always reflecting on that sports career. So in some ways, it's constantly, I'm being reminded by it so regularly. I think it's changed, though, whereas there was a lot of anxiety and fear and sadness associated to not winning the Olympics, whereas now I look back on it and reflect on how incredible my experience for Australia was. And, I got to do so many amazing things and compete in, 2 Commonwealth Games, bring home so many gold medals in my sport. And it's extraordinary. And it's funny, even Athens is a good example. I remember losing that Olympics, coming 5th and thinking, oh my God, I've come 5th, how tragic. Now as a doctor, I reflect on it and realise, oh my God, what a minor miracle that you even made it to the start line. And, what an incredible surgeon to fix a problem that another doctor had said would ruin my career. And, I've had a great knee. I've never had problems with it since. So it's just...
And you competed at the Olympics.
I know, exactly. Like 2 weeks after having surgery. It's crazy. It's like some people even said back then it wasn't true, that I'd made it up and that I'd never even had surgery. I remember seeing some of those articles going, are you kidding me? Like, this is ridiculous.
I loved watching the hockey roos recently in the Commonwealth Games, and they made the gold medal match and they lost to England. And of course, you're devastated. You've lost the gold medal. But I saw the coach say something about, don't forget, we've won the silver.
Yeah, exactly. Well, when you're an athlete, you see silver as the first loser. That's kind of the way your brain is wired if you are a gold medal favourite. I mean, don't get me wrong. I remember the first time I won a silver medal as a junior athlete, and I thought it was the most prized thing I'd ever seen in my life. So it very much depends where your expectations are. So if you're going in as a reigning world champion, which I went into the Olympics in Athens as, undefeated for 2 years, you think, well, that's impossible to be in love with 5th. Like, it's just, you're out of the medals even. But now, on reflection, I realise, wow, what an remarkable story that you get told you're never going to run again, let alone run the Olympics, and then 2.5 weeks later there you are on the start line. And what a gift that has given me. And fast forward now almost 20 years since that moment, and I realise, had I won the Olympic gold medal, I can guarantee I wouldn't be a doctor now, because I would have gone into commentary or media or sports coaching or working with the IOC or something like that. Whereas I realised, because I failed at the thing I wanted most, which was to win the Olympic gold medal, when I had the opportunity to hit my second life goal, which was to be a doctor, there was no way I was letting that go. So, and interestingly, I did very well at medical school, but I didn't pass the first entry exam into medicine either. I failed that entry exam. And so there was a great opportunity there for me to sit back and say, oh, well, I gave it a shot. I gave it a crack. The exam was really hard. I was an athlete for 20 years, so I have a great excuse not to go on and be a doctor. But I remember how much it hurt not winning in Athens and Beijing, and thinking, no, you know what? I've got to give this another go. Like, the only person who's going to know is the woman looking back at yourself in the mirror, whether you failed the exam a second, third or fourth time. I'm just going to keep doing it until they, say, oh, goodness, this woman clearly wants to be a doctor and let me in. So, thankfully, the second time I sat it, I got in and it's fine and I'm now a doctor. But, I really, really am grateful for the lessons I learned from losing the dream as a child and the future it's now given me.
The persistence and the grit you have is, it's quite overwhelming when you think about all of the things that you have gone through. At school, you were often cramming with textbooks in the car while driving to athletics training. How important was schoolwork to the young Jana Pittman?
Interestingly, a bit of both. So it was largely my parents' goal. So I vividly remember when I won my first Commonwealth Games in Manchester, my father said, I do not believe in sport as an income. She needs to go home and study medicine. So they never pushed me in athletics at all. So they were not the parents on the start line screaming for their kid to win a gold medal. But they were very strong that I would have an academic future, or at least the chance to if I wanted to. So it was a prerequisite in our family. If you didn't do your homework, you didn't get to train. So I would do whatever it takes, including lunch times were lost, most often studying in the library so that I could go to training that night. Or yes, in the car with torch, driving home. If there was work left undone, I'd somehow convince Mum to let me go to training anyway. And I guess because she knew I would study on the way home, she gave me that opportunity. But I talk to a lot of students about this now, and a lot of parents around how to balance their life if they've got a young athlete coming up in the family and they've got year 11 or 12 approaching. And it's interesting because my greatest results at school were also concurrent with my best results in the athletics or the bobsled. So even at medical school, I was doing the Winter Olympic Games, and it's interesting that when I stopped competing, my marks dropped, funnily enough, where you'd think they go the opposite when you have more time to give to your study. No way. That's the time where I felt sad, I ate really badly, and my health fell apart, and my mind obviously did the same, and I didn't get quite the same results.
What drove both your academic determination and the sporting prowess? Like, what was the driving factor? You're only 14, 15 years of age, and yet you're training like a demon. You're studying in your lunch hour. What was driving you?
Genetically, I definitely had that drive. My father is a workhorse. He's a builder. He's an engineer builder, but he would work on Christmas Day. He was that dedicated to getting a job finished. So we often lost opportunities to see my father because he was working so hard. But yet he's someone I have on a pedestal from an admiration perspective. So I don't feel guilty as a parent, for example, now with the amount I contribute to life, because I know that, well, Dad did the same and I came out wanting to be him, not being deterred by his drive. But I think that is because of my personality type. So I definitely grew up wanting to succeed, and it was certainly as a young person, it was a very innate, intrinsic desire to succeed. But interestingly, as I went through some of the negative media as a young athlete, and it became a little bit more extrinsic. So I ended up actually wanting to succeed to prove that I was good enough, or to prove that I was actually capable of being more than just what some of the media stories were presenting. So it's interesting how it was innate, and then I almost lost that ability because I became so afraid of public perception, and then I got that back again in the last couple of years when I realised that actually no, I'm quirky and different, but that actually is my strength, and I love to succeed for me, not just for to make people think that I'm that I'm okay, mate, kind of thing.
Do you think though there was, whether it was conscious, subconscious, some sort of pressure, because as I understand it, you did love it when your very workaholic father would take a day off to come and watch you in the athletics. Do you think that was, both a wonderful support for you, but also something that really made you push yourself beyond, what's reasonable in a way?
I have to firstly advocate here that you don't have to have a life like mine to be successful. I have seen far more relaxed, balanced people have a far happier life than try to chase some of the goals I have. And I do have, not regrets would be the wrong word, but I wish I'd done things differently, statements to myself where I think I could have still achieved possibly even more in athletics had I backed off a little bit. You learn that as you get a bit older and realise some of the mistakes you made. But so I don't know whether watching Dad has always been a positive thing, but I'm also a little bit guilt-ridden in the way that I sometimes do things, but it's a very intrinsic, it's a very personal feeling. I don't like going to bed at night feeling like I haven't finished a task. So I'm very task-focused. So if I set my mind to something, I don't like it not being finished. So that's always... I'm still working on trying to fix that part of me.
You have, of course, approached becoming a doctor in much the same way, Jana. This discipline, this drive. I've heard you read your textbooks while pedalling along on your stationary bike.
I told you, I haven't learned. I don't know how to answer that question, because it wasn't till I did SAS Australia last year that I actually looked back on my life with a bit of reflection and went, oh my gosh, you've overdone it. It took so many years. I'm almost 40 for myself to realise that some of my my unhappy days were because I was too tired and had pushed too hard. But it wasn't my nature to turn that switch down. And I think I still need to really sit down and sometimes take a breather and say, come on, JP, do you need to do that today? Does it have to be achieved today? Because you take on too much. And this year, having twins has literally bitten off more than I can chew. And I finally had to sit back and go, right, what can I take away? Because I can't live Jana Pittman life. I've got to live a normal, more measured existence, or my children are going to miss out, or I'm not going to succeed. But yeah, it took going through SAS last year for me to actually reflect on that at all.
What about when you had your cervical cancer scare in 2014? You had to have some of your cervix removed. Was that a moment where you could reflect on where you'd been, how you wanted to perhaps change your life going forward?
No, of course not. Should have been. No, that was a moment when I realised I wanted to be a gynaecologist. I'm like, sweet, I never want this to happen to any other women. I'm going to use my voice to make sure everyone's up to date with their pap smears and their CSTs, which is what we call it now, the cervical screening test, and to learn as much as I could around cervical dysplasia and cervical cancer, to be a voice for women around Australia. And so exactly, that was a prime example where I should have been reflecting on my life and realising that, it's fragile and it could be taken from you. But no, that was a time for me to push on and succeed or kick new goals.
This moment, though, also leads to quite a big decision to grow your family as a single mum. You had your son Cornelius, but you'd split up from his father, who was a former coach of yours. How did you work through the decision to go through IVF on your own?
As a child, I wanted three main things. So even as a 5-6-year-old, I wanted to be a doctor, I wanted to be an Olympic athlete, and I wanted to be a mum of 5. So that was kind of I grew up thinking that's what my life was going to be. I was already late 20s and I had been divorced, and I was definitely not in a position where I could commit wholeheartedly to somebody else. I really struggled in the relationship space. It's definitely been something my whole life. I've had difficulty with friendships and partners. So I remember thinking, right, I can freeze some eggs and do, like a lot of ladies are, focus on your career and come back to it when you're ready. But they told me if the cervical dysplasia didn't go away, I might have to have a hysterectomy. And therefore I thought, wow, if that doesn't change, I could not have any more children. It might be that my little man, at that stage he was only 6 or 7, wouldn't have any brothers and sisters. So I remember going over to my mum's house, and she's a very Christian woman, and sitting down and saying, right, Mum, I'm considering using a sperm donor to have my babies, expecting that would go down like a lead balloon. But actually my mum had also wanted to have a really big family, and had unfortunately had a late stage miscarriage with a child after my brother and I, and even actually before my brother and I. There's only 2 in our family. She'd been told she couldn't have children. And so when she married my dad, it was under the proviso she wouldn't have any children herself, and then I was her little miracle and my brother her second one. So for Mum, the idea of having lots of grandkids was something she really loved as well. So she'd also been through my divorce with me and how difficult that was for all of us, and realised that I just wasn't in a space to do that. So knowing that I could not have more children down the track, she supported me wholeheartedly. We picked the donor together over a block of chocolate and a coffee. I was pregnant a couple of months later.
So a growing family has been a huge focus even over the last decade. And earlier this year, you gave birth to twins. As you said, you always wanted the big family. You mentioned 5. There's now 6.
There is. I've bitten off more than I can chew, definitely. No, it's wonderful. It's wonderful.
And how do you juggle all of that? I mean, every mum listening to this, every parent listening to this wants to know, look, honestly, how do you have a sports commentating career, be a doctor, have 6 kids? How are you juggling all this?
My honest answer to that is I'm not. Every morning is a challenge and every day is different. And sometimes the kids go with lunch orders to school because I've forgotten or haven't had time to pack the lunches that morning and realise as we're in the car on the way there. It takes a village. So I've had to get my mum involved. She's there right now, for example, with the twins. We've hired help out to come. I've got of 2 lovely ladies, Steph and Kylie, who come regularly and help me with the babies, which is wonderful. You just need to outsource. And there is a real taboo around that, I think, in society to say that a mother says she's failing if she asks someone to come and help her. And we have to change that because you can't do everything. I am a big believer you can have it all. You just can't have it all at once. And the only way you can do that is to let go of that mother guilt. Don't get me wrong. It rages on in me. There's no tomorrow. But to reduce it a little bit is to outsource where you can. So getting people to help you with the washing, helping with the cooking, ordering that lunch order occasionally is a real benefit.
It's such valuable advice because my girls are 12 and 14 now. But if I look back, trying to juggle a busy career, run a household, have the kids, run them to sport training and music classes, be a good wife, see my friends,
exactly.
Do some exercise, eat healthy. I just made it hard on myself. I, insisted on cooking every meal, being the person who did all the care, and it's just crazy.
Well, you say that, but there's also people that love that aspect. I look at my sister-in-law, my brother's wife, and she is an extraordinary stay-at-home mother who is doing the best job with her 2 kids. And if that's what your heart says is right, then that's what you do. And I have loved the last 4 months being home with the twins, so I did take a little bit longer maternity leave. As doctors, we get 14 weeks, and I took 26 just because I wanted to be home longer with the babies. But, that's my choice. I could take a year if that's something that I wanted to do. But I love my job, and I love being a great role model to my girls as well. So it's what we choose in our heart and what feels right for us. But yes, there's a lot of pressure, and I think outsourcing, if you are able to and your heart allows it, is a really good idea.
And then there's this next twist. So I mentioned 6 mini Janas, but there aren't just 6, are there? There's actually a 7th.
I had the privilege of donating an egg, one of my one of your ovum, to my best friends, Brad and Hamish. So they are a same-sex couple, obviously, so they don't have any oocytes, and they really wanted to start a family, and we've been friends for almost 20 years now. So Brad was actually my massage therapist at the Olympics, would you believe, back in the day, and we've just stayed wonderful friends ever since. And I donated to another family, and they saw that I'd done that, and they're like, "Oh, actually, would you mind doing it for us?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah, sure." So yeah, they have a beautiful little daughter, Marley, and they're the most amazing dads.
It's extraordinary to me that you've got such a great relationship with her as well, via the fact that you've got this strong friendship with your former massage therapist.
That's right.
I'm just wondering, without sharing too much personal detail, but how did you negotiate, what would be the appropriate amount of involvement from you?
Very interesting, and it's great to talk about because we need more donors in Australia. So it's that opportunity. If you feel comfortable knowing that there's a little person who's genetically related to you, and also who may come in time to know who you are, if it's not on a day-to-day basis, then it's a great, incredible thing to be able to be involved in, and to give that family the opportunity to be parents, because there are a lot of families out there that can't have children, or couples who are, like my beautiful Brad, who has only got sperm and need an egg, and I look at them, and the life that they give that little girl is extraordinary. But it was a difficult decision only around that I wouldn't see her every day, but I knew she existed, and knowing that and feeling confident that the child will be raised the way you'd like your own child to be raised, but ultimately having no control over that either, because it's not your child. It might genetically be related to you, but she is their daughter. She's my aunt. I'm her auntie. But my girls are related to her, so we have a very close, what we call rainbow family, and I just feel incredibly privileged to be involved in it.
Dr. Jana Pittman's my guest, and we're about to get into the biggest challenge she's ever faced, and it actually wasn't on the track. This event was almost the undoing of Jana. That's shortly on Curveball. Jana Pittman was sitting at her kitchen table 2/3 of the way through her medical degree. Her sporting career was over. She was a single mum with 3 young kids, and the bills were piling up. And she suddenly realised she couldn't pay the mortgage. Jana, how bad did it get?
Look, I know there's a lot worse out there. I've worked at Blacktown and Mount Druitt Hospital, so I can't say, to be honest with you, that my situation was even close to some of the people I've seen who have no roof over their heads. And I was very, very lucky that my parents stepped up and bankrolled me for 2 years, which was extraordinary. Very embarrassing to actually have to go cap in hand to your 70-plus-year-old parents and say, "Mum, I've totally under-budgeted for my lifestyle, and that I need their help." So, yeah, I vividly remember looking at my account and thinking, "Oh, my God, I have $20 in the account, a mortgage due and food to pay." So it was really hard, and I cried a lot of tears, and I'm just very grateful that my parents were actually in a position to help me out. I'm pretty proud of them that they worked so hard in their life that they were able to step up and literally looked after us for that period of time.
I'm wondering if this was another moment, though, where this overachieving personality again, you'd bitten off more than you could chew. You had too many balls in the air. Do you look back on that and think, look, sometimes I need to choose the easier road here?
Well, I could have. So, at that point in time, I was doing one speaking gig, maybe, every couple of months, because that's all I could fit in. So I could have given up medicine, and that's what I was facing. So when I went to my mum and dad and said, right, I need to let you guys know that I'm dropping out of medical school because I can't afford to be a full-time student anymore, that's when Dad said, that's absolutely not happening. You've worked so damn hard to get to the fourth year of medical school. You're doing incredibly well, because at that stage I was, top 10 in my year. So academically I was in the right job, clearly. He's like, I'm not going to let that happen. So, through lots of hugs and tears, we made a plan, and, they lent me the money for that period of time. And it was, Dad and I have always believed it's better to have more balls in the air than having no opportunities. You do what you have to. So, I remember we did eat baked beans for a good 10 weeks, and the kids and I lived together in a room, and, we had help living with us at that stage, and, she ended up moving into that space so that we could survive. And it was an interesting period, but I think I'm better for it, to be honest, because you realise how little you can survive on and how much the children actually just need love. They don't need to go to, flip out every weekend and eat McDonald's, because all they actually want is time with you. And I think that made me a better mother for that experience.
I'm keen to go back to your athletics career, and you had dreams of getting to the Sydney Olympics, but the first dream wasn't really about being a competitor.
No, it definitely wasn't. I wanted to carry a basket behind Cathy Freeman. That was my absolute goal for the Sydney Olympic Games. And I remember putting in the application forms. I mean, obviously, you wouldn't necessarily get Cathy Freeman. You could get any of the other amazing athletes at Sydney. But I put in that application form thinking, how amazing would it be to get down on the track at the Olympic Games and hold the clothes of an Olympic athlete. And I thought that would be incredible.
But then suddenly, out of almost nowhere, you run this crazy time in the lead up to the Sydney Games as a 17-year-old, and it kicks off your relationship with the Olympics. So what becomes your happiest memory from Sydney?
From Sydney, running in the 4x4 with, I didn't get to run with Cathy because she only ran in the final, but I ran in the heats with Tams and Susan Andrews, and it was just it was a wonderful experience to be able to be in a relay. I mean, don't get me wrong, it was great doing an individual event as well, but I didn't even make it out of the heats. So I was just young and I was running against some incredible athletes, including the Olympic champion was in my heat, and I was I think I was a bit distracted by her, to be honest, and wasn't concentrating as well as I could have. And anyway, that's what happens when you're a junior and a bit overawed by the experience. But running in the relay, I ran very, very well, and the Australian crowd behind you was just lifted you up. And yeah, I remember running down the back straight, and the signs were like, everyone was banging on the advertising signs, and it was so extraordinarily loud. Them cheering for Australia, it was amazing.
So next it's a world title, there's Commonwealth Games glory for you. You do go on and step on that world stage as an athlete, and that finds you at some pretty glamorous events, including one in Monaco.
Yeah, lots of times that you went to do galas. That particular event you're referring to was the world presentation for the best athletes in the world, and I was very lucky that I won the World Juniors, both the 400 and the 400 hurdles. So I got what's called the Rising Star of the Year award. So they flew us over to Monaco, and we did. They had like a big presentation, and there was lots of. Actually, that was probably the most glittered event I'd ever been to in terms of being a young athlete sitting with the Angelo Taylors and the Cathy Freemans and the Sally Gunnells of the world. Imagine yourself being a young athlete who's only just made the Olympics but really has never met a superstar, to sitting in a room full of superstars. Like the entire room was full of Sebastian Coes. It was like,
wow.
So cool, right? It was mind-boggling.
But also not just athletes. You strike up a friendship at this event.
I did. And I don't mind sharing, because it was a really lovely moment in my life, actually, because I had absolutely no idea who he was. So I remember being at an after party. We were at this little nightclub in Monaco, and there was so many famous athletes. Like, every athlete there was famous except me. With all the athletes in the room. But I'm thinking, why did you, I wonder why he even spoke to me. Maybe I was the most gawky looking in the room, or looked like I needed saving or something. I have no idea. But yeah, we struck up a friendship. He, bought me a wine. And I remember back then, I think the equivalent of a wine would be like $100 these days. And I'm like, I don't have $100. So I was, drinking water from the taps in the bathroom. And so when someone offered to buy me a drink, I was like, yeah, sure. I had absolutely no idea who he was, which maybe that in itself was what attracted to him to talk to me, because I had zero idea. And it wasn't actually till he said, would you like to go out for dinner the next night? I said, yeah, sure, that sounds great. He actually walked me back to my hotel, and I only knew him as Albert. I had no idea who he was. Yeah, so it was interesting that the following day his secretary came to drop off the instructions for the night and said, the prince will meet you down in the foyer. And I was like, excuse me, what? Yeah. And then I remember going back into my room and practically passing out and ringing my mum and said, Mum, I think I have a date with Prince Albert. And that was the start of it. Yeah.
Oh my goodness, what a ride. What a ride. But then, of course, the focus is all on the Olympics in Athens in 2004. You're the world champion. Your preparation is looking absolutely perfect. And then really out of nowhere, there's this pop with your knee.
I still think it's a blessing not winning the Olympics because of the career I now have. But at the time, it was earth-shattering, because I'd run a world record that week in training as well. So we knew I was on absolute fire to bring home that gold medal. And then it happened so randomly, and then it was over. So, we spent 2 weeks trying to rehab it, and obviously we ended up making the Olympics, thank goodness, and making the final. But to have that dream so quickly shattered, it's a great message actually to other young athletes to realise that so quickly your career can be over in a heartbeat, or that tragedy can happen and you don't end up fulfilling your dream, and to have that backup plan. Because at that stage I had no backup plan. I didn't have any idea what I was going to do, and it was heartbreaking.
Yeah, so you think you're out. Like, the Olympic dream is, you're told by the first surgeon, this is over, you've got no chance of running. Your coach is told there is no hope whatsoever. And then you get this other phone call just completely out of the blue.
Yeah, through the media, he'd seen it. So it was really interesting. So there was obviously media everywhere at that event because it was the Zurich Golden League. So it was one of the biggest events in the world. And I was warming up to race that, and it popped in the warm up. So straight afterwards, everyone's asking, "Oh, are you going to run the Olympics?" And the Swiss surgeon that was there said, "No way." So they did an MRI. So they took me to the hospital straight away that night. I had an MRI at midnight. That's what they do over there for elite athletes. It's extraordinary. And then he said, "Look, that kind of tear in the meniscus would not allow you to run. You really need to go home and rehab it, have the surgery, and then sit on it for 6 months and see if you're even lucky to run again well." So that obviously got out into the media, and then we had this amazing surgeon, Dr. Haddad from the UK, from London, write to my coach and say, "Can I at least have a look at the MRI? We've got this new form of surgery and I think I can get it to the Olympics. And, what did I have to lose?" So we literally got on a plane, flew to London, operated the next day, and I was back running within 2-3 days after that. It's extraordinary.
So can you just step me through what happened post-surgery and the timelines here? Because as I understand it, you had days, not weeks, not months, you had days pretty much to come from surgery to be on the track to compete at the Olympics.
Yeah, so it was probably I think it was about 2 weeks from the time I did that to flying over and having the surgery to then we then flew to Italy and did our rehab in Italy. And that was about a week and a half before we flew into Athens. And yeah, we pretty much raced as soon as we got there. But we did so much mental preparation. So even though the body wasn't able to do a lot in that sort of 2 weeks, we did lots of rehearsals. We did lots of meditation, lots of healing meditation. So Debbie Flintoff-King came with me. She was the sole Olympic champion. She was also my coach, Phil King's wife. So I had a pretty extraordinary team, I have to be honest. And my medical team was amazing as well. And I had round-the-clock medical assistants. So I had Andrew Lambert, who was my physio, who was with me 24/7, and Tim Barber, my doctor, was there as well, pretty much around the clock. And we did so much rehab and so much preparation that it was extraordinary to then get out and then obviously compete.
This is a total roller coaster though. Like you're out and then you're back in and then you're having this miraculous surgery and you're trying to get back on the track and then you don't medal. Like, I cannot fathom the roller coaster that this is across a 2-3 week time span. How did you deal with all of this, especially because you were like 23, 24 years old?
Yeah, I was quite young. I didn't deal with it very well, to be honest. I think interestingly, for the way I can prove that is that for years to come, even when I would talk about Beijing or London, I would always say, "And I didn't make it to Athens." And it was interesting because I always sort of went back to that repressed sadness, I think, of actually, for some reason I was locked or stuck in the era of Athens, even if I was referring to a different Olympics, despite the fact that I didn't go to those or lost those Olympics too with injury. For some reason, the one that hurt most was that one. And I think, as you say, it was due to the roller coaster of that. So 1 minute you're the best in the world, then you're not racing, then you are racing, and then you make the final, you're going to win, then you didn't win, and then the media response to that, and then coming home to Australia and being up and down and up and down. Half the Australian public think you're extraordinary for even making it. The other half hate you because you've been over-publicised and, cried after the race and that kind of stuff. So it was a incredibly difficult period to go through. But it was also that every athlete that goes to the Olympics has a similar experience, because even if you just rock up with an expectation of winning or just making the final, the adrenaline and everything that goes into that, you always have that real lull afterwards. So after any championships, whether you're victorious or not, you have that real, "Oh God, now what?" period. So yeah, I think it's a really up and down roller coaster, no matter what the outcome is.
There was this media frenzy, as you mentioned. After your surgery, you sort of famously walk out of the hospital towards the cameras and you throw your crutches away in triumph. Like the top athletes in the world when they're injured and then they have this triumphant comeback. Like, that's kind of the sport. It's the theatrical moment that we all love. Why do you regret that in some way?
It's a bit of both. I regret it because if I hadn't have done it, I don't reckon I would have got the label Drama Jana back in the day, because I see that as dramatic. But I also saw it as what an incredible miracle. Like, one minute you're told you're not running, the next minute you can't, you can walk and you're about to hit the track again. And, I don't know, I just saw it as, I couldn't perceive how that would be taken as anything other than look what an Aussie can do and how amazing are we as a nation in terms of just grit and just sheer determination. So, yeah, I couldn't see that as being painted negatively. I can in hindsight, hence the regret, because I'm like, but my regret isn't around throwing the crutches. My regret is understanding the social concept of what I did, because to me there was only positive in that. I even painted like a little Aussie flag on my knee that basically said dare to dream, but it's just that's not necessarily how the world works. And I think as a young athlete, that's what I struggled with. I struggled with the not understanding why you'd want to pull down something that is actually could be perceived and used to motivate and inspire young women and young athletes to come afterwards. Whereas I think that story frightened young people from doing media and frightened people from being authentic and honest.
The other thing that strikes me, and because I've been watching some clips from around this time, is that you were so young. You're recovering from the surgery in London and you do this piece for 60 minutes. And, you're 22, 23. I kind of wondered, what sort of advice were you getting at the time? Like, was that really wise to go on a show like 60 Minutes in the middle of your rehab with all the pressure going into the Olympics?
I didn't have a choice, actually. So I was contracted to Channel 9 and the rights of the Olympics were Channel 7. So it was in my contract to do those shows if things happened that were newsworthy. So the mistake I made then was taking on a contract that had that ability over you in a competition situation. So the advice there is don't. And there's a flip side there, though. You have to make money as a young athlete. So track and field is not, as much as it looks very glamorous, it's actually not particularly high paying as a sport. And majority of the time we break even with our funding versus what we're required to pay. So realistically, at that time, I should have had a manager that was able to step up and say, but if she does this, she's going to lose the Olympic Games and then you're going to not get your bang for your buck anyway, guys. Let her do her thing and she'll give you the stories afterwards. But the other issue there was I was managed by the same person as Ian Thorpe at the time, and Ian Thorpe was going through some injury concerns, so he was always with Thorpe and I was kind of left to do my own thing. So it was just what we call in medicine a Swiss cheese event, where there's lots of holes and it just happened that you fell through them.
Coming home from Athens was so hard for you. You'd been, as you mentioned, dubbed Drama Jana by the media. What were those coming home parades like for you?
Look, some of them were good, some of them were great. Other times it was hard because you definitely had a mixed response from the Australian public, and I also wanted to come home with a medal, like we all did. And I'd done the previous Commonwealth Games victory parades, and obviously I was the gold medalist, multiple dingle dangles around your neck, so that was always a lovely experience. Whereas at this time I wanted to show respect and gratitude to the public that had really supported me through the ups and downs of that Athens campaign. So I definitely showed up, but yeah, there was some people that didn't necessarily want you to be there, and that was something I just try not to focus on these days.
It also takes a toll on relationships. You and fellow athlete Tamsin Lewis, you grew up as best mates on the track, such kind of soulmates in a lot of ways, very parallel careers. But the pressure, the media wanting to almost pit you against each other, that kind of drove a wedge between the two of you.
It did for a number of years. Thankfully, that we don't have that anymore, and we did reconcile many years ago. And we now, I love listening to her commentate the actual games. For example, Commonwealth, she was amazing. She did the Olympics as well. I think motherhood helps as well when you both have kids. So we've sort of reconnected on that. But athletics is very lonely. A lot of international sports are. We don't have the same number of, like, for example, the swimmers do. So when you're travelling internationally, you really don't have a lot of Aussies there on the circuit because, the majority of athletes are Jamaican, American, Russian, that kind of thing. And you really rely on those friendships. So it was definitely a period where I am very grateful to now have her back as a friend. And I definitely try to encourage other young athletes to pick up a phone and directly speak to someone. If something in the media is said about one of your friends and maybe it relates to your friendship and your relationship, it's so much easier to squash that by just asking them the question rather than potentially listening to what something's been printed about and then ruining a potential friendship.
You mentioned that you were being coached by Phil King, who of course is Debbie Flintoff-King's husband, did a lot for her career as well. But you did make a switch to having Chris, who then became your husband, to coach you. Why the switch?
I think Phil and I both found Athens really tough. So, we both thought we'd win the gold medal. Neither of us ever conceived the idea that it wasn't going to be a victorious event, and it was a lot of pressure. We were a sole coaching scenario, so it was Phil and I and the squad. We had other athletes that sort of helped around. There was a wonderful lady, Rebecca from New Zealand, who stepped up and trained with us, and I had quite a few boys that would run with me because of the speed they could keep up. It was great, but it was very much Phil and I against the other athletes in the world, and I felt like he took on so much of the pain of that moment. We both needed a break, and logically it made sense. I was living in England with Chris Rawlinson, who was my husband. He was a 400 hurdler as well. He was an excellent 400 hurdler, ranked number 2 in the world that year. So I loved training with the guys. So getting into a squad where you were always at the back, and so pushing yourself to try and catch men is the way to win championships. So I was over there training with him, and Phil and I were sort of on a sabbatical at that point, and I just said, look, I'd like to train in this squad. And Phil said, that's a great idea. Try it for a year and see where you're at. And then I went back to Phil probably a few years later. So it went full circle, and my last few years were under Phil. He's an amazing coach, very, very strict, very old school in the way he trains. He became almost like a father to me. So he still is. I still call him my second dad. So, it's a lot of pressure on a relationship.
And then 10 years after Athens, you get a call from a friend who wants you to join the women's bobsled team. Now, what even made you contemplate this, given by this point you've got a family, you're juggling stuff, life has moved on, it's very hectic for you?
Well, I was still running, so I was still doing a little bit of athletics, and at that stage realising that I probably wouldn't make another track and field Olympic Games, but thinking, well, I've got a really athletic body. I'm 6 foot tall and 75 kilos for something, so it'd be great to try a different sport. So I was trying, at the time I was doing boxing and rowing and cycling, actually, track cycling. So I was trying a few different sports to see if I maybe fit there, and I guess Astrid got wind of this, and she's like, hey, you want to come and try bobsled? And I'm like, absolutely, yes. So I was hooked from the first time I got in the sled.
Can you take us inside a bobsled? Like, what's it like?
It's nothing what you'd expect, because I remember before I actually started bobsled, I went to SeaWorld on the Gold Coast and got on one of the rides there thinking this is what it's going to be like, and it's completely different. It's rough. There's no padding in the seats. It's very, very, very noisy, unless you crash. Because when you do crash, it's all silent and really smooth. And you're like, oh, that feels lovely. Oh, shit. And what's actually happening is you're about to hit your head on the ice and get dragged along the track for 160 metres. But it was extraordinary. Like it was so fast and so much adrenaline that it was every adrenaline junkie's dream.
You go to the Winter Olympics, you place 14th. Does that matter?
No, not really. I mean, don't get me wrong. There was a part of us that thought and hoped that we might actually be in the medal contention when we first started, because Astrid was such a great pilot, and she thought if she had the big heavy me on the back, which I was a very good pusher, because you often do push contests just against the other athletes just to see where you're at. I was decent at it, that we'd have a medal chance. But 14th at the Olympic Games is still fantastic, because it's not necessarily about winning. And for me, it was a very big part about competing at both the Summer and Winter Games, and being the first woman to do that was pretty cool.
And you've been commentating these last few years. What goes through your head now when you see young athletes, fronting up to the media after a tough race or maybe a tough loss, or even when you look at the swimmers, the way media's, got Cody Simpson and Kyle Chalmers and the drama.
I don't know, to be honest. I do look at it and sometimes I think, wonderful. We're at least seeing the person behind the athlete. People have a heart. They have dreams. They get shattered at games. Not necessarily the relationship stuff. That's I've never done that, thankfully, but it happens. You still fall in love and you fall out of love, and it just, you can't hide that. You are who you are, and it's very difficult to rein that in sometimes, particularly if you're competing against someone who you've dated in the past. So, but, I think we have to give everyone the opportunity to be who they are and love them regardless of what they say and what they do, because they're doing their best. They're trying to represent their country, and you see them at their greatest and their worst, because if you've just lost a race that you've trained your whole life for, it's very hard to rein that in. And I also like to see the vulnerability in the athlete, to know that they actually love what they do and that they have that passion.
Last year, you stepped back out into the public spotlight. So you appeared, as you mentioned, on the TV show SAS Australia. And after all that media scrutiny on you, the hostility that you'd copped, the fact that you'd already found a new life beyond sport, what made you decide to put yourself back out there?
Well, I didn't always have negative media, to be honest. I had some negative media. I had a hell of a lot of beautiful media too. So I look at some of the stories that were done and they were so kind and just, I think we focus on the negative because that's what you do. You ruminate on the things that go poorly. But, I had Scotty Gullen and Jenny Mackesy back in the day who wrote such phenomenal stories, Mike Hurst. So some journos that really made an effort to reward me for the performances that I did and also the social activities and the ambassador roles that I had, they helped me get into medical school. So, and I've had an impact in a lot of people's lives in sport and off the track. So, I don't think that wasn't the reason I did SAS. I did it for a few reasons. One, I needed a bit of a kick up the arse after having a baby 5.5 months before. I need a goal. I'm not particularly someone who trains well without something. It's 5 months post having the twins and I haven't done very much, to be honest, because I need that sort of ambition to push myself. My brother was an ex-Afghani veteran, so he'd represented our country as a veteran in the army, and I really wanted to feel a little bit what he had experienced. He'd been gassed and basically done everything I got to do in his career, and I wanted to, I guess, do it for free. It was great. And I wanted to push myself. I always believe I'm a pretty tough cookie, and I wanted to see if that was true. So it was an opportunity to do all of those.
And what do you think you learned most about yourself, either, when you were pushing yourself through those very grueling physical challenges or even some of the psychological tests?
I learned I was as strong as I thought I was, which was great. Mentally more than physically. My body fell apart constantly, but I kind of knew that, so that was fine. I also, as I was kind of touching on before, realised that it was time to slow down a little bit in life and be happy with who I was as a person. And, my ability to see positive in everything allows me to be passionate and dramatic and really loud and happy and, a lot of energy in my voice. And that's why I can do multiple things and keep multiple balls in the air, is because I have that ability to push so hard and be so optimistic in life. And I love that about myself. Now, it didn't always.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if that was deliberate, that flip of the script. So for a large part of your athletics career, your emotions were kind of framed as a weakness,
negative,
right?
Yep.
And then you suddenly decide, do you know what, that's actually me. And it means I'm not bottling it up like half the other athletes who still 20 years later haven't dealt with
Honey,
things.
it's not half the athletes, it's half the population. That is not something that's, everybody has emotion and everybody goes through horrible things in life, and how we deal with those disappointments sets us up to take opportunities in the future. I always kind of put it back to a child. You get a young person, they don't get what they want, they bawl their eyes out, they have a little tantrum. The next minute they're smiling and happy and asking for something else and taking on another opportunity in life. But yet for some reason as an adult, of course we need to rein it in a little bit, but why can't we do that internally? Why can't we actually look at a situation and go, God, I'm disappointed, I'm so angry that happened. Hey, look at that beautiful opportunity over there. I'm going to go run through that door and achieve that. And I guess I've never really grown up. I've just accepted that who I am means I've got incredible opportunities, and I like that I'm different from the average, whereas I always so badly wanted to fit in. Whereas now I realise, actually, no, I'm never going to fit in, and I am a voice for those who are different. And, hopefully they sit on their lounge or listen to this and go, yeah, I'm different too. And I'm going to actually choose to like who I am and realise that I can have a great impact when I stop wallowing and worrying about everybody else's opinion and just live my life to be the best who I can be.
You've now got this wonderful rainbow family, as you mentioned, the supportive husband, the medical career that's going gangbusters, a swag of medals on the track, at university, in your medical profession. What's your focus now in terms of legacy?
It's hard. I think when I die, I want I guess, we heard with Shane Warne passing away, we heard all his wonderful stories and what his accolades were. I think I'd just love people to say that she was a real human that was honest with all the ups and downs in life and inspired others to get the best out of themselves. That would, to me, be a legacy I would be very proud to leave with my family.
It is a remarkable career and so much to be proud of. I think that your life just, swaps between extremes. There's the extreme passion, the extreme obsessions, but also the extreme highs and lows that you embrace. So congratulations on an incredible career. Dr. Jana Pittman, the only Australian woman to compete in both the Summer and Winter Olympics. She's now a specialist and passionate advocate for women's health, a mum to 6 kids, including twins, a sports commentator, and she mentioned there that she was in SAS Australia. She's now even an Army reservist. Curveball's produced by Dead Set Studios, and do me a quick favour right now, leave a review for Curveball in whichever podcast app that you use. It helps others find our show. This episode was produced by Grace Pashley. The executive producers for Curveball are Rachel Fountain and me, and you can find out more at curveballshow.com.